Today on Empowering Workplaces, we are chatting about the really important topic of psychological safety with two leading experts on the subject, Dr. Carolyn Helbig and Minette Norman, authors of the book, The Psychological Safety Playbook. You don't want to miss this one. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for everyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We are your hosts, culture designer Maddie Grant and organizational psychologist Sonia Lucina. Join us in today's awesome conversation. All right. Well, welcome so much to the show, Minette and Carolyn. We're so happy to have you. And this is a really, really great topic for us. We have not discussed this before, psychological safety. I think it's something that is being talked about actually a lot these days. So the opportunity to learn more about, what it is and how it affects workers in the workplace and companies who want to make, safer workplaces. Is just a great opportunity. So as always, we'd love to start off with some introductions. I'm going to throw it to you, Minette, first. Just tell us a bit about your background and how you got into this topic.
Sure, happy to start. I spent 30 years in the software industry, and it was in really, I would say, probably the last 8 years or so, maybe last 5 years, that I came to really understand what psychological safety was. I was leading a very large team at the end of those 30 years. I was leading engineering at a large company. I was trying to drive change. And at the same time, I was realizing we're not really listening to one another. Voices aren't always welcome. Even my voice, I was a VP at the time, my voice isn't welcome all the time. And I was reading everything I could find on collaboration and listening and human interaction. And I uncovered the Google study in which it was called Project Aristotle. It was done around 2012, in which they discovered that psychological safety was the most important quality of successful, high-performing teams. And when I read that study and then saw the work of Amy Edmondson, who'd been researching psychological safety, I realized this is the missing link. This is the term I didn't understand, but it's what enables people to really fully contribute, feel part of a team, feel like they are valued. And so I got really interested in it. Then I left the industry in 2019, started my own business, and tried to find some more information about, I know how important psychological safety is, but how do we increase it? So I signed up for a class in 2021 on running psychological safety assessments based on Amy Edmondson's work. And that's where I met my fabulous co-author, Caroline Helbig. We were in the same class, and we were both really seeking out practical information on psychological safety because we both are leadership consultants. And I'll let her introduce herself, but what I do now is I really focus on helping leaders in their team be more inclusive. And psychological safety is such a huge piece of that. So we were both looking for that information. And I'm just going to hand it over to Caroline and let her pick up with her background and how she came to it.
Great. Thank you, Minette. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting us, Maddie. What brought me to psychological safety? Actually, my path was a little bit different. My background is in science. So I was always interested in, I wanted to understand how do human beings function. And after my PhD in human genetics, I joined McKinsey as a top management consultant and did a lot of work with very different teams in different organizations, different companies, different countries, and realized how different teams are. And I wished I knew the term psychological safety earlier, because this was explaining so much. And also with McKinsey, I was interested, what is it that some teams are doing great work and some teams with fabulous resources, with brilliant minds on the team, just don't do good work. They really they don't succeed. And I started then out as an independent leadership consultant, focusing on emotional intelligence, mindset, and things like that. And that was the time when I discovered the term psychological safety. And suddenly all the different pieces fell into place. And I suddenly knew, yes, that was really the parameter which could have explained the different performance levels I experienced, and also the different experience I had being part of the teams. In some teams, it was just fun, even though pressure was high and you had to deliver unbelievably quickly a lot of things. And in some teams, it was really awful to be part of the teams, exactly because psychological safety was missing. And I mean, this might sound like an academic term. However, it's really a basic human experience we all know, right? We know how it is to be part of a team where you can be yourself and really be open and come up with questions, ideas, admit mistakes, admit that you don't know everything, maybe ask questions which in other teams you wouldn't dare to ask because you know others would maybe see you as not competent, not professional, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I discovered this term. I wanted to become more to go deeper into this concept and joined this class based on Amy Edmondson's methodology, becoming a fearless organization practitioner, and I met Minette.
I love it. I love it. So before we get more into the definition of psychological safety, because I know that we want to dig into that a little bit, let's go to Sonia and our data point.
And I'm just bursting with questions, so I can't wait to get through the data point because I think the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. I'm actually an organizational psychologist, and this is something that I think about a lot. And I think it's always been such an important concept, but I think now I just came back from a conference in Chicago, and a lot of people were talking with really large global organizations for the most part. And a lot of them were talking about, the future of work and what does it look like. And as you can imagine, a lot of conversations around hybrid. And we all know, the impacts of pandemic. And so anyways, I'll go to the data point now, and then I'll come back with my, handbag full of questions for both of you, because again, I think it's just the work that you're doing is just so incredibly important. So we asked, Question Pro, a part of what we do is we actually do market research. And so we went out and asked 300 workers around the US how familiar they are with the concept of psychological safety and its potential benefits in the workplace. And so what we found is a relatively similar split. So again, how familiar are you with the concept and its benefits? 23%, so almost a quarter, said they're not familiar at all. 43% there said are somewhat familiar. And then 35%, so just over a third, said very familiar. So what jumped out at me, with this data is there's a lot of awareness that can be increased in the market. Now, you study this topic a lot more intimately than I do. First of all, I'd wanted to ask you, and maybe Carolyn, we can start with you. Did these findings surprise you based on your work that you do with individuals and organizations? Would you say, yeah, it seems, about a third would really know what it is, about a quarter would, have no idea, and the rest are in the middle? Or do you see something different in organizations?
No, I would say it's pretty much in line with what I see within organizations in big companies here based in Germany, but also smaller ones. So I think if you would go out here and do the same survey, probably the results would be around the same.
Yeah. And then I guess my next question, and maybe Minette for you, is I guess if we take a step back and we think about awareness and organizations really being familiar with this concept, what would be some of your recommendations or some of the work? And I think I know there could be a million answers, so maybe you could just choose a few of your favorite ones, because I could see it being top down, I could see it being bottom up. But clearly, there's a lot of work to be done in that area. But for organizations or individuals that are not even familiar with the concept, I guess we have to start with awareness. So what would you say maybe for somebody that's listening to us, and probably they tuned in either because they're really passionate about the concept or want to learn more, but it's something that's important to them. So if it's something that they maybe wanted to evangelize inside of their organization, what would you be your recommendation to them around how could you maybe spread more knowledge inside of your workplace, or just make sure that more people understand what it is and its importance?
I think there's such a gamut of awareness, really, like as your survey shows, that a lot of people have heard it, and to some it's a buzzword and some are like, I don't know what it is. But I think what we need to go back to and how to evangelize it is, what are the benefits? Like, always go back to the why. Why do we care about psychological safety? And it's not psychological safety as an end in itself, it's what it enables. Because psychological safety, with all the research behind it, a lot of it from Amy Edmondson and others, is that it enables high performance, it enables innovation, it helps contribute to a feeling of inclusion and belonging that is so important in our workplaces. And so when you think about like these things, performance, innovation, inclusion, belonging, employee retention and motivation and engagement, all these things are enabled by having a foundation of psychological safety. So I think that's the place to start, is like, don't we all want this? And then when we think about also the workplaces today and how much really mental health suffering and burnout is going on, and much of that is because people do not feel safe and are in these somewhat toxic environments. So we all should care about it. And then the next question, of course, and why we really did the work that we did on this playbook, is then the how. So the why is really important for people to understand. And then pretty quickly, like, you don't want to dwell forever in the why. You want to get really into the tangible things that every single one of us, whether we're at the C level, we're somewhere in the middle, or we're an individual contributor. Because as Caroline said originally, this is in a team. Like, psychological safety exists in a team environment. So every single member of a team plays a role in either increasing or decreasing the level of psychological safety that others are experiencing. And of course, leaders play a very important role, because they set the tone in such an important way. But I will say that every member of every team can contribute. So that's where I would hand it over to Caroline, or back to you, Sonia, for more thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask one more and then I'll hand it over to Maddie to jump in with some questions. Is maybe Caroline, how, let's say I'm a leader and I'm learning about this concept and I think, oh goodness, I hope I'm fostering psychological safety in my team, but I know that it can get really, and I was actually reading just something from HBR, like, I know it can be really passionate and it comes from a good place, but maybe it's really overwhelming to my team. Or maybe I'm coming in with all these ideas and is that making them nervous to speak up? So that's maybe like a really kind of nice end of the psychological safety. Like, I know that there are different examples, but if somebody is listening to us again and is wondering, how would I know if my team is feeling psychological safety, or if there's something that maybe I can be doing differently? Like, how do you do that self-assessment, or how do you effectively have the conversation with your team to almost know your individual starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also some interesting research showing that leaders systematically overestimate the level of psychological safety in their teams.
Yes.
And it's not so easy and natural for people to really feel safe, because we are all having a brain, and the brain is really wired for being risk averse. The purpose is to keep us safe and not to take risk and be courageous and so on. So it's not easy to create a climate in your team where people feel comfortable speaking up, questioning status quo and things like that. So for the leader, it's really responsibility to create a climate where this risk aversion can be overcome by the others. However, if you as a leader have a certain style, it's better to be authentic and transparent. So for example, if you're passionate, if you maybe because you're passionate, you are not always perfectly not interrupting other people, it's probably not going to be a problem, right? Because you feel, you're doing this out of passion, not because you want to dominate, not because of ego or something, not because you're devaluing the other person's perspective. So, and I also know here companies, more than mid-sized companies, where the tone is quite rough. Yeah, the tone is quite rough, and you might be surprised sitting in the team meetings and witnessing how they talk to each other. However, they all feel perfectly safe, and they are all very authentic, and they know they are not. It's not bad intention or something underneath. They are perfectly connected to each other, and they are just open. So. The idea is not to be kind of over polite or something, or to adopt the style which is not your personal style. The idea is to be open, transparent, to be the human being you are, and invite everyone else to be the human beings they are, and then do the best work you can.
That's one of the things I find so fascinating about this topic, is that to me, psychological safety is not actually about being safe, right? It's about being able to step out of your comfort zone, being able to contradict or to offer a different opinion or to speak up or do any of those things that are actually not safe at all, right? But it's a very kind of subtle thing where you do feel safe in your ability to do that without harm, I guess, right? But you're not.
It's like being or feeling.
Yeah,
like you don't have to be safe, you can feel safe.
Exactly. You don't want to
that.
just be safe and just give like the common answers and, go with the crowd all the time. It's not that kind of safety that we're trying to get to, right?
No,
so
I
I
really
actually
like oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on that. See, I interrupted you with enthusiasm there, not to negate your thought. What I wanted to say is that it's almost like it's the safety to take a risk or the safety to step into danger. And I hadn't really thought about that, but that's what it is. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. The safety to step into danger. Yeah. So do you think at heart, and maybe just this to Minette, since we started off on this, but at the heart of it, is it really about like communication styles and understanding each other's different kinds of communication styles, or is there more to it?
I think that's a big piece of it for sure. Communication, which involves both how we speak to each other and how we listen to each other. Because of course, when we think about communication, it's what we're saying, but it's really about what we're not saying, how we're listening, how we're showing up, even our body language. I mean, body language can have a big effect, negative and positive, on someone's experience of, is my viewpoint welcome, right? Someone rolls their eyes when you say something and you just feel this big, you feel tiny and you feel unimportant. So yeah, it's about communication as a big part of it. And it's also about, and we talk about this in the book, self-awareness of our own behavior. And so I think that's a big missing piece. It's not only communication, it's how we show up. Are we aware of our own biases? Are we and our blind spots? And then how we react to people, how we listen to some people maybe more attentively because we have an affinity bias. We think they think like us, and so we're more drawn to them, versus are we truly listening with an open mind and an open heart to someone who may be challenging us or comes with a very different perspective. So that comes back to us, and are we truly open to other viewpoints? That's a really, really big piece of being able to create a safe environment. And we talk about this idea, like one of the first things we recommend for anyone is asking the question, what am I missing? What am I not seeing as a person with my own, lenses and viewpoints and biases? What can you show me and tell me that I haven't thought of? That's a really big piece.
Yeah, and maybe adding to that, so the communication is all rooted deeply in the mindset, and the mindset of openness, of humility, of curiosity, of empathy. And I think the example Minette just shared, what am I missing? This question is only powerful if you asked it in the right mindset, in the mindset of being humble enough to realize what you see is not the whole picture, that there are other perspectives and other pieces of information you don't have. and being humble as a leader and asking others to contribute, inviting others, and also being humble enough to kind of realize that your perspective is not the truth.
Yeah, well, I think that's where organizations can have a really huge role in helping their leaders as well for a couple of reasons. I think what you were saying, like the self-reflection and our understanding of how others perceive us. I've had that happen to me several times in my career where I'll create an atmosphere that I hope is open, where I hope people can really thrive with the absolute best intentions, but it's not right for everyone. Or there are certain things in my behavior that I don't realize, like, oh, for example, I checked messages and I answered when I was on vacation. So when I tell my team not to do that when they're on their vacation, they say, but you're behaving differently than what you're doing. What should I do? And so there were, again, definitely things that caught me by surprise. And oftentimes I felt so fortunate that my team actually felt safe enough to share that with me because it was a complete blind spot and it helped me change. And I just wonder, I do think that there is a role, like I was saying, organizations can play one to maybe foster more systematic feedback sessions. So you can have a lot of leaders that'll take the time and ask those, what else could I do? What else can I do differently? But some might not. And those who might not, sometimes might actually need the most help. And so I think for organizations, maybe to put some feedback processes in place, whether it's, 360 evaluations or annual or whatever, probably not annual reviews, a little bit more than that is necessary. And then provide the training, the coaching, the leadership, because a lot of what we're asking you is, what does one do? And for a lot of leaders, I unless it's a part of their work and a part of what we all study, who are on this episode, they might not know. And so there could be this huge thing that they're missing. And I love what you're saying about communication, because all of the research that we're doing recently, it's not something new, but even in the world where we have more technology and more ways to get information to one another, people are still saying organizational communication is not as effective. And that still continues to be an employee surveys, one of the lower scores. So it's not necessarily about the technology, but it's what you say, how you say it. And I do think individuals can get a lot of help and coaching around that. Like, I think that's one of those things that's maybe not so incredibly difficult to change. But if you leave it to each individual person to figure out on their own, it's not very efficient and it won't be very effective. So I think about when we have these organizations, not only for the individuals who are listening to us, what can they do themselves, but what are some of the bigger things that they can bring back to their companies to actually start to even influence that greater change at scale, right? So how do I, as somebody who's really passionate, go back and influence this change and behavior, across many individuals? So I love like the different points that you're bringing up, because I think it's giving our listeners some very concrete and important things to think about as they approach this.
So have you, in your book is called The Playbook, right? So I'm assuming there's lots of tips and advice. Are there other things we haven't really touched on yet that you want to mention? Maybe things that are in the book in terms of how people can get started?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Minette.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The whole book consists of really behavioral suggestions, what you can actually do. So actually the very actionable how of psychological safety. And we actually offer 25 of these ideas, what you,
awesome,
as a leader, as a team member, whatever your role is, can do day in and day out in every interaction. And these are grouped into kind of 5 big areas. And one area we have not yet touched upon is how we deal with risk and failure. I mean, we talked a little bit about risk, but how do we deal when things don't go as planned? And it's so common in teams and for leaders when there's a failure, when there's a mistake, that immediately the question is, who's responsible? And then it's really, what you're doing is you are punishing people for taking risk, right? Taking risk means there's a big chance that the outcome is not favorable. So we really need to shift from this kind of shame, blame game, and so on, really shift into bold curiosity and really see, okay, what can we learn from that, and unpack the learning value, and also change the way we discuss this. Blameless postmortems, for example, is also something we suggest to implement in your team meetings. And this is not something which comes natural to us, because we are wired for risk aversion. We are wired for kind of the tendency of hiding mistakes. So really going ahead and sharing openly what didn't go well and what we can learn from that is something we need to do deliberately. And this is something we also, the leader can play a really decisive role in how he or she deals with the situation when something goes not as planned. And for example, also at the beginning of an innovative project, an innovative endeavor, he or she can set expectations saying, this is new to us, so we will experience failure. And that would be very powerful, because it gives permission to everyone to do failure, to do mistakes, and share them. So it's not expected that we go straight away to success. No, we will experience failure, and success is just further down the road.
What I love about that is it's actually very similar to how I think about my culture work. So we do a lot of work around culture design and culture management. And that has to do with putting in processes that help you achieve the culture things that you're trying to achieve, like better collaboration, more transparency, whatever. But it's the idea that putting in actual processes, like having these postmortem meetings, or even a piece of the agenda of every project meeting has a little, I guess postmortem wouldn't be the right word, but just, a little change agenda item. What do we need to adjust because whatever we're doing is not working as we thought? It feels like a small thing, but it really can have huge benefits, I think, towards, this goal. So I didn't really have a question there. But yeah, so the playbook, there must be things for people at different levels of the organization, right? Are there, how do you deal with that? Is it really within a team structure, or sort of individual contributors versus sort of higher level people?
We wrote it. We thought about leaders at any level, and then we were really realizing it. You do not have to have a title that is a manager title or a leader title, because as I said earlier, every member of any team contributes to psychological safety. So we do know that anyone who is in a high hierarchical position has sort of an outsized role that they play, but every member contributes. And the other thing to think about that I think is important, like the playbook can be used anywhere in any organization. And we think it's especially useful for teams that work together regularly, because they can just keep assessing and adjusting. Like, what are we doing well in, for example, how we run our meetings? Are they inclusive? Do we chat about the things that we've learned that went badly? And then we can keep improving. We can talk more openly about it, because each team that you're a part of may have a different level of psychological safety. Like, you may be in a project team where people have worked together for a long time and they have sort of established those relationships, but then you may be part of another team that has just formed and you don't have that foundation. And so you need to invest maybe more in building that culture. So it's different across different organizations and different teams within organizations. And every person who is part of the team can contribute. So I don't think, and I don't think Caroline thinks, this is exclusively for any level. It is really, it really applies everywhere. And then what we've learned, which we really thought about it for the workplace. That's where we're trying to have a positive impact. But what we've learned from readers from around the world is that people are applying the lessons and the moves in the book into their personal lives as well. Because honestly, we struggle as human beings in interpersonal relationships outside the workplace. And a lot of these tips can help us there as well. So even though we didn't think of it as a personal help book, it can go beyond the workplace.
So you mentioned beyond the workplace. So I have to ask you, because I know Sonia mentioned it earlier, but the whole idea of the hybrid workplace, so people who are remote and in the office at times, what's the impact of all of that on the sort of strategies that you're recommending? Is it harder to do if your team is all remote, or is it easier? Does it not matter? What are your thoughts, Carolyn? Maybe.
Yeah, of course, a hybrid setting can really be challenging, right? So the team scattered all over the place and so on. However, we also see that virtual working in a virtual setting can also offer a lot of possibilities which you don't have when you are just sitting in the same room. So it can even be more inclusive. So for example, sharing via chat or working on virtual whiteboard together, things like that is really inviting to people who don't feel so comfortable really speaking up in a room where maybe others who are very dominating are also present. So it can really shift the needle towards more inclusive settings. However, you do have to be deliberate about it. And also, for example, making room and space for human connection, which is maybe just happening automatically at the water cooler or in the coffee kitchen or whatever. When you're only working virtually together, this might be something which is just not happening. So you need to have kind of a little bit of connecting time, a little bit of unstructured time, and or maybe think about what would be the right way to go about that. And there are many more innovative tools and possibilities. We just recently learned about the tool, I think it's in WebEx or Zoom, where you can monitor airtime and can make sure in a meeting that not a few people speak and take up the whole airtime, but you can make sure that everyone contributes.
I love that. Sonia, were you about to say something?
No, I was saying I love that too. I think I love all the points that you made about hybrid work. And I think, one of the things that we forget is that oftentimes, even before the word hybrid work existed, a lot of us were not in the same office, even when we were in offices. And so there are all these really interesting dynamics. And so just in last week, I was hearing a lot about, a lot of the conference was about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the panel talked a lot about how actually working remotely equalized a lot of the things. So to your point, for anybody who might be visually impaired, hearing impaired, being on a technology made it a lot easier to communicate, and it made it a lot easier for them to contribute. And I think part of the reason why it's so important to talk about those kinds of things is all of a sudden we're experiencing this really big swing of organizations saying we want to go back in person, which does have a lot of benefits, but so does flexibility. And so I think to make sure in all of this work, like psychological safety that you're doing, that we highlight the pros of both and maybe the challenges, and to your point, Carolyn, how you manage it. So, hey, this is where it works better. Here's what's a little bit harder. But I love what you were saying about, I think you said the WebEx technology and measuring airtime. I think that's a dynamic we didn't have before. And it can be so incredibly powerful to have different people's voices heard, not only introverts, extroverts, but then you get into, well, what was the demographic makeup of this meeting? And maybe there were a lot fewer women. Why did they almost get no airtime? And so you can start to backtrack into that psychological safety. Was there some lack in comfort? How can we make that better? Et cetera. So I love that you've studied it separately like that too. And I do think that that's something worth highlighting again, as organizations continue to debate the best way forward. I know we haven't figured it out yet, but having all that input is so incredibly valuable in decision-making.
Yeah, so we are just about out of time as always. But this was such an important topic, and everybody must read the book. Again, it's called The Psychological Safety Playbook. It is available on Amazon, yes. And we will, of course, put all the links in the podcast description for you listeners. But thank you so much for joining us today. This is such a wonderful conversation, and there's so much more we could be talking about. It's a big, big conversation, but lots of ideas already flowing. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you
for
both so
having
much.
us.
In addition to being the Empowering Workplaces host, I'm also the president of Question Pro Workforce, and I wanted to tell you a bit more about it because it so brilliantly aligns with our concept of empowerment. At Question Pro Workforce, we help organizations across the world better connect with their employees. We do this through continuous listening survey technology, as well as sharing our deep knowledge and expertise to help our clients know what questions to ask to most deeply connect with their workforce and take impactful action on data and insights they collect. Learn how Question Pro Workforce can be a great partner on your path to creating a really outstanding employee listening strategy and a remarkable organizational culture at questionpro.com/workforce.